My daughter-in-law convinced my daughter to cut me out of her life 12 years ago, and I spent every one of those years building something they never thought I was capable of. Then I sold my auto repair chain for $11 million, bought a 40-acre ranch outside Austin, and 3 days after the sale went public in the local paper, my daughter showed up at my gate with her husband, 2 teenagers, and enough luggage to survive a nuclear winter. She smiled at me through the intercom camera and said, "Daddy, we're home. We figured you wouldn't want to be out here all alone." They had no idea what was waiting for them on the other side of that gate. If you've ever had family treat you like a stranger until the moment your luck changed, hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Walter Greer. I am 64 years old, and this is the story of the best week of my life. I was standing on the back porch of the ranch drinking coffee when the gate camera pinged. I had bought the property 3 months earlier, 200 acres originally, but I'd parceled off 160 and kept the 40 that mattered. The limestone hill, the live oak canopy, the creek that ran cold even in August. The house sat on the high ground. 4 bedrooms, wraparound porch, a workshop out back that I had already filled with tools I finally had time to use. I had named the place Greer Hill in a moment of embarrassing sentimentality, then decided I didn't care about the embarrassment. When I walked to the front gate and saw the faces on the camera screen, I felt the same sensation I imagine a man feels when he hears a tree crack above him in a storm. That slow second before the fall. My daughter looked older than her 38 years. Her eyes moved past the camera immediately, scanning the property behind me, cataloging. Her husband stood slightly behind her, a man I had never fully trusted, carrying himself with the particular posture of someone who believes charm is a substitute for character. Behind them both, hanging at the edge of the frame, was my grandson. He was 16 now. The last time I had seen him, he was 4 years old, chasing a dog across my driveway. Now, he was tall and thin, and he was looking at the ground. I buzzed the gate open. I told myself I was doing it for the boy. They poured through the entrance like they'd been rehearsing it. My daughter hugged me, and it felt the way a business handshake feels when neither person means it. Her husband gripped my arm and said, "Walter, this place is incredible, man. You really did something here." He said it the way people say it, when they're counting your money in their head while they compliment your furniture. I said thank you. I took everyone inside and put coffee on, and I waited. The speech came about 20 minutes in. My daughter sat across from me at the kitchen table and delivered it with the careful pacing of someone who had practiced in the bathroom mirror. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said life was short. She said she knew things had been difficult between us, and she took responsibility for her part in that, though she never named a single specific thing she had done. She said her husband's business had hit a rough patch. Nothing serious, just a temporary cash flow problem, and they had decided the wisest thing was to simplify, consolidate, spend more time with family. She looked at me then with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "And honestly, Daddy, a place like this shouldn't belong to just one person. There's so much room here. It would be good for all of us." I looked at her husband. He was nodding along with her words, but his phone screen kept lighting up in his shirt pocket, and he kept pressing his elbow against it to mute the vibration. I looked at my grandson. He was sitting in the corner of the kitchen with a glass of water he hadn't touched, looking at the window like he was calculating how far the drop was. I said, "You can stay for a few days while we sort things out." My daughter's smile tightened at the edges, but she kept it in place. "Of course. Whatever you're comfortable with, Daddy." That night I lay in bed and listened to the sound of them settling into my house. I heard my daughter directing her husband where to put things. I heard cabinet doors opening in the kitchen. I heard the television come on in the living room at a volume they wouldn't have used if they thought they were guests. I stared at the ceiling fan, and I thought about Margaret, my wife, who had died 9 years ago from a heart attack she had, partly because of the stress my daughter and her husband had put into her final years. My daughter had not come to the funeral. Her husband had sent a card with a typed note inside and a signature that was clearly not his real signature. I thought about that for a while. Then I got up and went to my office and locked the door. The next morning, I was at the workshop by 6. I had a restoration project, a 1968 Ford Bronco. I had been rebuilding the way other men do crossword puzzles, slowly and with satisfaction. I was underneath it when I heard footsteps on the gravel. Small, careful footsteps. My grandson appeared at the workshop door. He was wearing jeans and an old hoodie, and he looked like he hadn't slept. He stood at the entrance with his hands in his pockets and said, I said, "Hand me that 3/8 socket wrench, and you can do more than watch." He came inside. He sat on the shop stool and handed me tools when I asked for them. And for a long time, neither of us said anything. That kind of quiet is the honest kind. I had forgotten what it felt like. After a while, he said, "How long did it take you to build the shop business?" I said, 22 years. Started with one bay and a used lift. He was quiet for another minute. Then he said, "Was it hard?" I said, "Every single day. That was the best part." He looked at his hands. He had grease on 2 fingers now, from passing me the wrench. He stared at it, like it was evidence of something. Then he said, very quietly, "Grandpa, they're not here because they missed you." I slid out from under the Bronco and sat up. I looked at him. "I know that," I said. His jaw tightened. He owes money to people who don't ask nicely when they want it back. He said his name flatly, the way you say a word that's lost all meaning from being said too many times. He lost our house. He lost both cars. We've been in 3 different rental places in the last 2 years. Mom acts like everything's fine. She tells people he's between ventures. He almost laughed on the last word, but it didn't come out as a laugh. I kept my voice level. "How much does he owe?" He looked at me. $380,000. I absorbed that number. To who? A man named Caldwell. He runs private lending out of San Antonio. He's not like mob or anything. He's worse. He's legitimate on paper. He just sends lawyers. He paused. They came to the last rental. Mom cried for 2 days, and then she started acting like it hadn't happened. That's what she does. I handed him a clean rag. He wiped the grease off his fingers. I asked the question I needed to ask. "Why are you telling me this?" He looked at me with the eyes of a 16-year-old who has learned things a 16-year-old should not know, because last week I heard them talking. He said they needed to get you to move the ranch into a family trust. He said if you were in the trust, they'd be co-trustees, and they could use the land as collateral. And Mom said something about how you'd been isolated out here, how a doctor might say you weren't in the best state of mind to manage your own affairs. She said it like it was a favor to you. The workshop was very quiet. Outside, a mourning dove called from somewhere in the live oaks. "There's something else," he said. I waited. "They told me last month that I'm going to a boarding school in New Mexico in September. Some kind of program for troubled youth." He said the last 2 words with a bitterness that was older than 16. I've never been in trouble once in my life. I have a 3.8 gigapascals. I work 20 hours a week at a grocery store. He looked at the Bronco. They just don't want me around once they've got what they need. I looked at my grandson. I looked at his steady hands and his honest eyes and the grease on the rag he was folding out of habit. I thought about the 4-year-old chasing a dog across my driveway. I thought about 12 years of birthday cards he never received because his mother decided my existence was an inconvenience. I said, "What's your school situation? Credits? Everything?" He looked confused by the question. "I'm a junior. I've got enough credits to graduate early if I do summer coursework." I nodded slowly. "And if you had a stable place to live, could you finish here in Austin?" He went very still. "Are you serious?" I said, "I don't make jokes before 7 in the morning. Go eat breakfast. Tell them I'm out here working. Don't let on that we talked." He stood up. He looked at me for a moment like he was trying to determine whether I was real. Then he said, "Okay," and walked back across the gravel. I reached for my phone and called the only lawyer I trusted completely, a woman named Ruth Chen, who had handled the sale of my shop chain with the kind of precision that made people nervous to sit across from her at a table. I told her I needed 2 things done before the weekend. She asked me what kind of trouble we were dealing with. I told her. There was a brief silence, and then she said, "I'll call you back in 2 hours." She called back in 90 minutes. The debt was real. Caldwell Holdings. Registered in Delaware. Operated out of San Antonio. Completely legitimate on paper, as my grandson had said. The balance with penalties was $412,000. Ruth said she could make contact through a business broker she knew and make an offer on the note today. Cash, full value, immediate transfer. I told her to do it. She told me she'd have confirmation by morning and asked me if I understood what I was doing. I told her I was buying a leash. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "I'll have the papers ready by Saturday." I spent the rest of that day playing the role they expected. I puttered around the property looking vague. I forgot where I put my coffee mug twice in front of my son-in-law, who watched each instance with the focused attention of a man taking notes. At dinner, my daughter cut my steak for me without being asked, which told me everything I needed to know about what they had already decided about my capabilities. I thanked her. I smiled at the wrong moments. I let sentences trail off. My son-in-law asked me, very casually, whether I had a financial advisor handling my affairs, or whether I was managing things myself. And I said I thought I had a man named Terry, but I sometimes got the number wrong when I called. That night I heard them through the wall of my office, where I had pressed my ear to the plaster, a thing I had not done since raising a teenager of my own. My daughter's voice was low and urgent. "He's more confused than I thought. Did you see him at dinner?" He couldn't remember if he'd taken his blood pressure medication. Her husband's voice, "That's actually good for us. Look, Sheila in San Antonio said the voluntary guardianship papers just need 2 signatures and a notary. I can have my buddy from the title company out here by Sunday. We say it's a routine estate planning meeting. We tell him it's paperwork that keeps the ranch protected from property taxes. And if he won't sign?" A pause. "He'll sign. He's lonely, Karen. These people always sign. When you tell them, it keeps the family together." My daughter was quiet. Then she said, "What about my son?" Another pause. One beat too long. "New Mexico is a good school. It's structured. He needs structure. He's not a troubled kid. He asks too many questions. He noticed the Caldwell letters. We can't have him talking to your father." I stepped back from the wall. I had enough. Ruth called at 7 the next morning. Caldwell had accepted the offer. The note transfer was signed and would be filed by end of business. I now held $412,000 of debt against my son-in-law's name with full recourse rights. She had also drafted emergency custody paperwork for my grandson, citing documented parental instability and confirmed plans to remove him from his current schooling environment against his interests. She said it was aggressive, but defensible. I told her I was having a housewarming party Saturday evening. I told her I'd like her to attend. She said, "Should I bring the blue folder?" I said, "Bring 2 copies." I spent Friday making calls. I called every man who had wrenched alongside me for the past 30 years. The ones who had come up with me from nothing. Who knew what my hands had built. I called my neighbor Ray, who ran a cattle operation 2 hills over and had a voice like a thunderstorm in a tin barn. I called the pastor from the church in town, who had married Margaret and me 41 years ago. I told everyone the same thing. Saturday evening, 7 o'clock, housewarming at Greer Hill. Come, as you are. My daughter overheard me on one of the calls, and her eyes lit up in a way that had nothing to do with joy. She offered to handle the catering. I said that was very kind. She made 3 calls in the next hour and put $1,200 on a credit card I later confirmed was attached to an account in my name that she had apparently found in my desk drawer. I let it go. Saturday arrived gray and cool, the way Texas evenings sometimes do in early spring when the air can't decide what it wants to be. My daughter moved through the house like she'd been living there for years, directing the caterers, rearranging furniture I had placed deliberately, telling my housekeeper Donna, who had worked for me since I bought the property, that the glasses needed to be polished again. Donna looked at me once across the kitchen with an expression I recognized as the particular patience of someone who is choosing not to say a thing. I patted her shoulder and told her she was fine. My son-in-law had arranged to have a notary present, a friend of his from somewhere, a small, careful man who arrived early and sat in the corner of the living room with a briefcase and tried to look like he was just another guest. I watched my son-in-law point him out to my daughter with a small nod, and I stored the information. Guests began arriving at 6:30. The ones my daughter had called came in their evening clothes with the specific manner of people attending a financial transaction dressed as a social event. The ones I had called came in their work shirts and clean jeans, gravel dust still in the creases of their boots, smelling of cedar and motor oil, and the particular honest tiredness of people who had used their bodies that week. My daughter watched the second group arrive and I saw her jaw tighten. She made her way to my side and pressed her fingers into my arm. "Daddy," she said, her voice pleasant and taut as a wire. "These are your guests?" I said. "The best ones." She glanced at her husband. He gave her a small shrug that meant later. At 7:15, my daughter gathered everyone toward the back porch, which overlooked the creek and the hill, and she made a small speech about family coming together, about legacy, about how her father had built something remarkable, and how the time had come to make sure it was properly protected and passed on. She said it beautifully. She had always been a gifted talker. People nodded. The notary friend shifted in his seat and opened the briefcase. My son-in-law came to my side and put his hand on my shoulder with the practiced warmth of a man who had done this before. "Walter," he said quietly, "this is just about making sure the ranch is safe. For the family. For your grandkids someday. Simple paperwork." I looked at the folder he was holding out. Guardianship transfer. Durable power of attorney. Full trustee rights. It was cleaner paperwork than I had expected. Someone had spent real money on a real lawyer. I took the folder. I held it. I looked around the porch at 50 people waiting. I said, "I'd like to say a few words first." My daughter smiled. "Of course, Daddy." I set the folder down on the porch railing. I straightened up to my full height. I am 6 feet tall, and I have been doing physical work since I was 14 years old. And when I stopped performing the stoop, I had been effecting for 4 days. The change in the room is immediate. My daughter's smile flickered. Her husband's hand came off my shoulder. I said, "I want to thank everyone for coming out to Greer Hill tonight. I especially want to thank the men who built things with me over the years. You know who you are. You've always known who you are." Ray raised his beer bottle from the edge of the crowd. A few of the others nodded. "My daughter tells you this is about protecting a legacy," I said. "She's right that it's about a legacy. She just has the wrong idea about what that word means." The porch was quiet now. The caterers had stopped moving. 40 years ago, I started with a single bay garage and a used hydraulic lift I bought at auction for $600. I worked 6 days a week for 15 years before I took a real vacation. I built that business on one principle. You tell people the truth. You do the work you promised. And you charge a fair price. That's it. No shortcuts. No clever paperwork. I looked at the notary in the corner. No friends with briefcases. The man closed his case. My son-in-law took a step forward. His voice was low and controlled. "You owe $412,000 to a lending firm called Caldwell Holdings," I said. The color left his face. "You lost your house. You lost your cars. You've been in 3 rentals in 24 months. You came here not because you missed me, and not because you're concerned about my welfare." I looked at my daughter. Her eyes were wide and still. "You came because the paper announced I had sold my business for $11 million, and you needed a place to hide from your debt and a signature to steal an asset." My daughter said, "Daddy, you plan to have me declared mentally unfit," I said. I heard the conversation. I heard the part about troubled youth programs in New Mexico designed to get a 16-year-old boy out of the way before he asked the wrong questions. I looked toward the kitchen door where my grandson had appeared, standing in the light with his hands quiet at his sides. He asked the right questions. The guests were motionless. The ones in evening clothes looked at each other. The ones in work shirts looked at me. My daughter found her voice. It was shaking. You are humiliating us in front of all these people. You came into my home and you touched my grandson's future, I said. You don't get a quiet exit for that. Ruth Chen appeared from inside the house then, moving through the kitchen door with the blue folder under her arm and the specific unhurried energy of someone who has never needed to rush because she has already won. She walked to the railing and set 2 documents beside the folder my son-in-law had brought. Mr. Greer purchased the Caldwell Holdings note on your husband's debt yesterday morning, Ruth said to my daughter, her voice carrying the way voices do when the speaker has spent 30 years in courtrooms. He holds the full note, the full interest, and all associated recourse rights. The balance is due immediately upon his request. My son-in-law looked at the documents. He looked at my daughter. Something in him calculated and failed and recalculated and failed again. He had the look of a man who has run a certain play his entire life and has finally encountered a defense he didn't scout. You can't, he started. I can, I said. The question is whether I do. I picked up Ruth's first document. This is a custody petition, full legal guardianship of my grandson, transferring to me, citing parental instability and documented intent to remove a minor from his educational environment against his interests. Ruth tells me the family court in Travis County tends to move quickly on these. My daughter put her hand over her mouth. And this, I said, picking up the second document, is what I'm offering instead. You sign voluntary temporary guardianship over to me for the remainder of my grandson's time in high school. You agree to a restraining provision that keeps this property off limits until he graduates. In exchange, I do not call the Caldwell debt due today. I give you 12 months to restructure it at 0 additional interest. I set it down. That is the whole offer. My son-in-law said, You're extorting us. I'm offering you better terms than Caldwell was, I said. Think carefully about which one of us is the threat here. The silence stretched. Out in the creek bottom, an owl called once and went quiet. My son-in-law looked at my daughter. Whatever passed between them was not love, and it was not loyalty, and it was not even strategy. It was the particular look of 2 people calculating separately and reaching the same cold answer. My daughter turned to me. Her voice was small and tired in a way I had never heard from her before, even when she was a child. Can I talk to my son first? I nodded. She walked to the kitchen door. My grandson stepped out onto the porch to meet her. They stood together for a moment. I could not hear what she said. He listened, his arms at his sides, his face composed in the careful way of someone who has learned that composure is the only protection they have. Then she touched his cheek with the backs of her fingers, briefly, and walked back to the railing. She picked up the pen Ruth was holding out. She signed without reading the full document. Her husband signed 30 seconds later, pressing hard enough that the second page took the impression. Ruth collected everything, checked each signature line, and said, I'll file first thing Monday morning. She looked at my son-in-law. Oh, you'll receive the modified debt schedule by certified mail within 10 days. My son-in-law picked up his briefcase. He looked at me one last time with an expression I have seen before on men who have made a bad business decision. Not anger, not remorse, but the specific flat look of someone filing the loss away as a cost of doing business. He walked off the porch and across the gravel, and I heard a car start on the far side of the house. My daughter stood for another moment. She looked at me and then passed me at the ranch in the evening light. The creek, glinting at the bottom of the hill. The live oaks, black against the pale sky. She had grown up watching me work, watching me come home with grease under my nails and money slow in coming, and honesty in every transaction. And somewhere in the last 15 years she had decided that was not enough, that there was a faster way, that the man her husband was represented something better. I don't know what she saw in my face. I tried to keep it neutral. She said, I didn't think you were this kind of man. I said, I've always been exactly this kind of man. You just stopped looking. Oh, I mean, I think. She walked to the car. The gate opened and closed, and that was that. I stood on the porch for a moment longer. Ray walked over and handed me a beer. He didn't say anything, because Ray is a man who understands the difference between a moment that needs words and a moment that doesn't. I accepted the bottle, and we stood together, looking at the creek. Then I heard boots on the porch steps, and my grandson appeared beside me. He had his hands in the pockets of his hoodie, and he was looking out at the same hill I was looking at. He said, "Are they gone?" I said, "They're gone," he exhaled. It was the kind of exhale that takes 12 years to build up. After a while, the party found its footing again, the way things do when the hard part is finished. Donna brought out food. Ray's crew took over the porch chairs. The pastor had somehow found the guitar I kept on a hook in the workshop and was playing something low and unhurried in the corner. My grandson sat on the porch rail and accepted a plate of food from Donna, who looked at him with the specific warmth of a woman who has decided something in the last 2 hours without saying it out loud. When the last of the guests had gone, and the ranch was quiet, and the creek was making its nighttime sounds, I sat down next to my grandson on the back steps. The sky over the hill was enormous and full of stars, the way it gets out here, away from city light, and we sat in it for a while without talking. He said, "What happens now?" I said, "Monday morning, you call the guidance counselor at the high school in town. We figure out transfer credits. If you want to, you can work with me on the Bronco on weekday evenings after school. It'll take us another 6 months at least." He looked at the stars. "And after graduation?" I said. "After graduation, you have choices. Real ones. Not ones somebody else made for you. College, trade school. Start something from nothing. It's all there, if you're willing to do the work." I looked at him. "I can teach you what I know. The useful parts and the parts that took me 20 years to figure out. You don't have to learn them the hard way if you don't want to." He thought about that. "What if I do want to learn the hard way?" I said. "Then you'll fit right in around here." He smiled. It was a 16-year-old smile. Small and provisional. The kind you give when you're not sure yet that smiling is safe. But it was real. I thought about my wife, Margaret, and what she would have said about this evening. She had loved my daughter the way you love something you've poured 20 years into, even when it doesn't give back what you put in. She would have grieved what happened tonight, but she would have understood why it had to happen. Because Margaret was the person who first told me that love without accountability is just possession, and she told me that while washing grease off my hands at the kitchen sink, 35 years ago, in a house worth nothing by anybody's measure except ours. I owned 40 acres and a limestone hill and a workshop with a half-finished Bronco in it, and a grandson who asked the right questions. That was enough. That was more than enough. I got up and turned the porch light off. The creek kept running in the dark. Somewhere on the hill, an owl moved through the trees without a sound. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe to Revenge Accounts. And I want to know what you think in the comments. Did I go too far with my daughter, or did she earn every bit of it? I read every single comment. Until next time, take care of the people who deserve it, and stop caring the ones who don't.